Hello everyone, in this video we are going to learn in nitty-gritty details about Anglo-Saxon literature, the literary trends, major historical events, and what are the major political factors that decide and shape and modify the literary outputs of the age. Historically speaking, Anglo-Saxon period or the Old English period begins from the 5th century, and it extends up to 1066 with the Norman conquest and British literature. So 5th century is the beginning time of Anglo-Saxon or the Old English period, and 1066 is the end period or end time for the Anglo-Saxon age or the Old English period. So before the arrival of the Danish king or the other invaders in Britain has a very difficult structure, demographic structure, because Britain was populated by the tribes, and there was no unanimous ruler or king, so to speak. Therefore, 410, the Roman troop, they invaded Britain beforehand, and in 410 AD, the removal of the Roman troop from Britain makes the continent more vulnerable to the foreign invasion and inroads. And after the removal of the foreign troop in 410 AD, the remarkable historical event is the arrival of the missionaries and the beginning of their Christianization mission in 597 AD. With the Christianization mission, there was a clash between the pagan tribes who were residing in the continent, and at the same time, the arrival of the Christianity, their new Christian ideas and messages, and religious conflict. So, the poetry, the literary output of this age is tremendously influenced by the arrival of the Christian missionaries and their Christianizing missions. And ultimately, in the 9th century, the Danish king conquered Britain, and there was the establishment of the Danelaw law under the able leadership of King Alfred the Great. And after this, we have witnessed the tremendous literary development and growth. So basically, if we look at the British literature at this time, we will be able to understand the three major subdivisions in the literary outputs. First is the poetry. Poetry was a very popular method of literary expression during that time, and apart from poetry, we have Anglo-Saxon prose. Anglo-Saxon prose was also very important literary output during that time. And apart from Anglo-Saxon prose and Anglo-Saxon poetry or the Old English poetry, we have Anglo-Saxon chronicles. So these three subdivisions we can observe in the Old English period. Now let me first mention Old English poetry or the Anglo-Saxon poetry. Now let me define very clearly why Old English poetry is called Anglo-Saxon poetry. Because after the removal of the Roman troop in 410 AD, as I have already mentioned, it makes the entire continent more vulnerable to the inroads of the foreign invasion. During this time, Utes, Angles, and Saxons, three Germanic tribes, they invaded the entire continent, and ultimately, due to the supremacy, Angles and Saxons, they jointly ruled the entire continent. So from this time onwards, the entire period gets to be known as Anglo-Saxon age or Anglo-Saxon period. Now, Anglo-Saxon poetry subject-wise was very interesting. We find the subjective personal experiences. At the same time, there was lyrical elements existing in all these poems. And apart from lyrical or subjective expressions apart from the philosophical aspects of life, we find also in Anglo-Saxon poetry the preponderant reference to Christian elements, Christian didactic messages. So the Christian messages and the personal subjective experiences of life, which is very much lyrical and elegiac in tone, they basically shape the poetic output of this age. So let me make a subdivision of Anglo-Saxon poetry. First subdivision of Anglo-Saxon poetry is the personal, subjective, or the elegiac poems, and second subdivision or subcategory is the Christian didactic poems. Now, first let me talk about personal, subjective, or the elegiac poems. Anglo-Saxon elegiac poems are very interesting because they talk about personal suffering, loss, despondency, disappointment, and the personal feelings of remaining recluse in life. So there are seven major elegiac poems in Anglo-Saxon age. By the way, let me define what is elegy. Elegy is a poem that expresses the sadness or lamentation of the poetic persona. So in Anglo-Saxon poetry, we find the major elegiac poems are seven in number. First is the Ruinberg. The Ruinberg is a poem that describes the fragmentary state of a city known as the Ruinberg, which was long time before a prosperous and a beautiful city. The ruins of the city, the fragmentation of the city appear to be very lamentable to the poetic persona. Second is the wife's lament. The wife here is the speaker. Here we find interestingly the feminine voice. The wife is the speaker. The subjective experience of the female self is very interesting here. And in the wife's message in the poem, the wife is being cast away by the husband due to her infidelity, and it makes the wife very unhappy and sad. So the wife laments. Her lamentation and her grief and her utmost desire to get united with her husband gets reflected in the poem. Next is the husband's message. The husband's message is a very interesting Anglo-Saxon poem because the husband here um, um, encrypted writes his message on the bark of a tree. And here in Sanskrit literature we have the reference to Meghdootam by Mahakavi Kalidasa. Here in the poem Meghdootam by Mahakavi Kalidasa, the husband, the lovelorn husband, who was being cursed by the god and who was forced to stay away from his wife. With the advent of the rainy season, he makes the cloud his messenger and he asks the cloud to send his love messages to his wife. So like the Meghdootam, we find the same references in the Anglo-Saxon poetry. Here the husband is very much in an anguishing tone and he misses his wife. So he makes his message on the bark of the tree and asks the tree to convey his message to his wife and to inform her that how much she is being missed by her husband. Next is the, as I have mentioned, next is the Wolf and Edwasser. Wolf and Edwasser is also an elegiac poem, and most importantly the subjective expression of the poetic personas are there. Another important elegiac poem is the Widsith. The Widsith means for traveler. Here a traveler who is very imaginary, so to speak. He recounts his experiences of visiting various big palaces, places and kings. So the entire description sounds very fantastic. Next is the Battle of Brunanburg. The Battle of Brunanburg is a historical battle which was fought in the year 993. Next poem is the Battle of Maldon. The Battle of Maldon is truly a historical battle which took place in the year 937. And there is also the emphasis on individual deeds of valor in the poem The Battle of Maldon. There is also a very famous poem, The Fight at Finnsburg. 48 line of this poem is available till date, and the reference to the fight at Finnsburg is also there in the Beowulf episode also. Now let me move back to the Beowulf episode. What is Beowulf? Beowulf is the first epic of the Anglo-Saxon age, and Beowulf was the hero of the Geats. Geats are the Germanic tribes, and Beowulf was a valerian warrior of the Geats. So Beowulf, along with his band of valiant warriors, Beowulf came in order to assist the Danish king Hrothgar, because his palace Heorot is getting invaded by the monster called Grendel. Beowulf killed Grendel, and Grendel's mother came to take the revenge of her son's death, but she meets the same fate. The second part of Beowulf describes the successful reigning period and prosperous reigning period of Beowulf for 40 years. After that, Beowulf's kingdom is again getting invaded by the fire-spitting dragon from the sea. So Beowulf again fought with the enemy, the fire-spitting dragon, and he also received the mortal wound and he died at the end. And after the end, we find the description of the Beowulf's funeral pyre and how each and every citizen of his kingdom laments his death. That is very striking here. And if you look at the structure of Beowulf, Beowulf is the first existing epic of the Anglo-Saxon period. Though Beowulf is not a British by birth, Beowulf was the king of the Beowulf was the king of the Geats, who are the Germanic tribes. But Beowulf's valor, his gallantry, his ability to offer peace and prosperity to his subjects make Beowulf a Christ-like figure. And many elements in Beowulf are interpolated in later times, and many critics they have observed that these works are interpolation by the Christian poets in order to inculcate or spread the message of Christianity through Beowulf. So there are many important features in the Beowulf manuscript or the Beowulf epic as such, where we can discern the Christian elements. For example, the triumph of Beowulf over the evil forces like Grendel, his mother, and the fire-spitting dragon, and at the same time the death of Beowulf in order to make his kingdom very peaceful and enemy free for his subjects, make him appear in the image of Christ, and the triumph of good over evil, and ultimately the final sacrifice or martyrdom of Beowulf makes him appear like a Christ to the readers. So these are the Christian elements, and many other Christian interpolated segments are there. But till date, 3,182 lines of the epic are extant, and in the entire poem we find very repetitive gestures, alliterative lines, kennings, epic similes, and epic formulas. So in the NET or UG or PG entrances, sometimes we find the question, what is kenning? Kennings are the compound words, two words joined together to give meaning to an object or a person or something. For example, bone house, bone-house. Bone house means body, the body. So this is an example of kenning. In Beowulf manuscript we find a lot of examples of kenning and epic formulas. So basically, apart from the poetry, prose, Anglo-Saxon chronicles, there was the existence of Anglo-Saxon epic. The only extant epic is Beowulf, though many scholars later times they talk about the epic called Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh is still an underexplored area, and critics always ascribe the status of being first epic to Beowulf. Now, apart from the elegiac poems, as we have discussed earlier, now let me get back to the Christian elements or the Christian poems in Anglo-Saxon age. Here we find life was centered around church and religion and God. And before the arrival of the Christian missionaries in 597 AD, there was pagan population in Britain who were the worshippers of the nature. So their God was very different. They believed the entire nature is the manifestation of the God. So apart from the pagan people, there were the Christians. So the Christianizing mission started in Britain, and its tremendous impact was there in the poems of the time. So we find two important poets who are writing following the Christian themes. One is the Kidman or Sidman, another is the Cineulp or Kineulp. So Kidman was a lay person. He was an illiterate one. By the divine inspiration and divine blessing, one fine day he started to write divine messages through his poems. Though many poems are attributed to him, but the real authorship of all these poems is still truly unknown. But Kidmonian group of poems are basically the high hymns. He wrote the hymns. The hymns made him very famous. There are only 9 lines of the hymns are extant till date, but the hymns made him very famous, and people call him the father of Old English poem. But apart from the hymns, there are other poems. For example, Exodus, Daniel. So these poems are attributed to Kidman, but we don't know whether or not he is truly the author of all these poems. Kidmonian group of poems are basically the paraphrase of the biblical facts or events, and the literary expression or the literary caliber are not very much present in all these poems. Next Christian poet is Sineul. Sineul's poetic genius is greater than that of Kidman's, and he signed his names at the end of all of his poems. So this signature is called signature in runic letters. So his 4 poems, Eileen, Juliana, Christ, the Fate of the Apostles, the 4 poems are attributed to Sineulf, and his poetic genius was greater than that of Kidman's. Sineulfian poems are very much interesting because of their handling of the subject matter, because these poems are not only pure references from the biblical facts, but apart from this, Cenolfian group of poems are very interesting because apart from the Christian facts, he also mingled with them his poetic expression. So the poetic creativity and biblical facts both are combined in the Cenolfian group of poems. Now, apart from this, we find the very vibrant literary genre of this time, that is the Anglo Saxon prose. Anglo Saxon prose was very interesting, and its development was also very interesting. Why? Because when King Alfred the Great he invaded the entire continent, he found the lamentable state of the English prose. That is why, being a king, he took the patronage of supporting and elevating the status of the Anglo Saxon prose. So he himself was enthusiastic about education. So he himself translated 5 works. Both he says Consolation of Philosophy, Pope Gregory the Great's Pastoral Care, Orosius's The History of the World, and St. Augustine's Soliloquies, and Bates' The Ecclesiastical History of England. So these 5 works were translated by him. And apart from this, we find the mention of Ælfric and Wulfstan, 2 renowned, remarkable prose writers of this time. Ælfric is known for his homilies and his the lives of the saints and his Catholic homilies. 2 works are attributed to Ælfric, and Wulfstan, as a prose writer, his genius is very important, and his poetic brilliance was greater than that of Ælfric's. And Wulfstan's work is Sarma Lupi ad Angles. So the single work is attributed to Wulfstan. So apart from this, in Anglo-Saxon age, we find a reference to Menton chronicles. What are the chronicles? Chronicles are the historical records of the time that was being preserved very carefully so that they can be treated as the valid historical narratives of the period of the time. So the Anglo-Saxon chronicles have various segments, and all these historical events are painted down in 7 manuscripts. So they are being marked as manuscript number A, manuscript B, C, D, E, F, G, like this. So here one important question you should remember very carefully is that all the 4 manuscripts of Anglo-Saxon age, they are still there, and the 4 important manuscripts are called Curtin Vitellius manuscripts, the Exeter book, the Vercelli book, and the Junius manuscript. These manuscripts are preserved in various parts of Britain, and they contain very important manuscripts of the Anglo-Saxon age. For example, the Curtin Vitellius manuscript is also known as the Beowulf manuscript because it contains the Beowulf manuscript and also the manuscript of Whitsit. And next manuscript is the Exeter book. Exeter book contains the 2 of the signed poems of Ceneul, and it is donated to the cathedral by Bishop Leofric. The Exeter book is there in the Exeter Cathedral in the chapter library. The Versailles book is in the Cathedral Library of Versailles near Milan. It contains Eileen Andrews and the Dream of the Rood and two of the signed poems of Sineul. And Junius manuscript is called Junius because it belonged to the person called Junus, was a librarian of Lord Arundel, and he was the first person to print the entire manuscript in 1655. And the Junius manuscript is there in the Bodleian Library of Oxford. So far, we find all of the major historical facts, literary outputs, their genius and how they are different. So basically, Anglo-Saxon age witnessed the development of the English poetry or English literature, so to speak. Before Anglo-Saxon age, no record of any written or any kind of poetic or literary activity was found. So basically, during this time, literature was in the oral form. A very significant number of poets or the prose writers or the historians, they were writing literary or poetic things in the written form. So the type of literature that we found during this time is basically oral in nature. So in my next video, I'll be focusing on the Middle English period. Stay tuned for more updates. Thank you.